Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Here's Perry, to Gar Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Comes to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it! Into Booker. Here's the three. Suzanne! Oliver, Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. Bravo time! He got it! Suzanne! Oh, brother!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less, a podcast about the NBA and the Phoenix Suns. My name is Max McCauley, aka Podcast Boy, and I am not currently joined by David Nash or our guest Cole Zwicker, because I am recording this introduction a few days after we recorded the episode you are about to hear. Again, our Suns post-lottery breakdown spectacular went so long that we figured it'd be better to break it up into 2 episodes. This is part 2. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I recommend doing so, not because this won't make sense without it, but because Cole has incredible insight and is well worth your time. This week, we're continuing our discussion of the Suns' options at number 6 with DeAndre Hunter, Brandon Clarke, Nassir Little, and Grant Williams. Then we move on to a Phoenix Suns team-building segment, starting by comparing their young core to the recent lottery prospects, and then moving on to free agency and the way we see the Suns building around the core. And, of course, we don't let Cole leave without sharing more of the insight he's gained on the Suns roster through his time working for the team. Okay, that's it for my introduction. Here's the episode. I hope you all enjoy.
All right, so let's move on to the next guys. So we got DeAndre Hunter, Grant Williams, Brandon Clarke, and Nassir Little. We're calling this our big wings and bigs, kind of our biggish guys. Cole, would you mind running through kind of where you have each? Not necessarily, you're not asking you, exact placement, but like sort of generally how you feel about them and a brief explanation of why.
I mean, I obviously love Brandon Clarke. I have similar thoughts to Max on this podcast. I do think he's a little bit more team dependent. I love him with Karl Anthony Towns. I think that's an awesome team fit because Towns has already shown the ability to carry a high level offense. So you can kind of plug Clarke around him, have him protect the rim, be an ultra athlete, do the instinctual stuff. But I do think that it's going to be dependent on how teams use him. I hate to keep coming back to this, but if a team uses him, off the bench as a small ball 5, he's not going to be as effective, and he might just, get pushed down the pecking order. I think if you're really going to get value for him, you got to play him the right way. DeAndre Hunter is pretty straightforward to me. I wrote like a 41-minute piece. I'm going to spare you reading that. I would not advise it. You value your sanity. So
41 minutes, Cole.
Yeah, man. I do it to myself. I don't know, but a guy who can really switch, like he's got good feet on the ball. I think a lot of guys overvalue his defense. The point you made about defense, Max, was spot on. As far as you have to view it in several different capacities. Team defense, reaction off the ball. Switching isn't just on-ball switching. It's not just, a 1-5 pick and roll. You got to fluidly switch off the ball. You got to make quick decisions. You got to rotate. And I don't feel great about Hunter's feel level in general, but I do trust his feet, and I love his length guarding. If you want to put him on Paul George and say guard that guy for 38 minutes and just make it tough, he's probably my favorite bet in the draft to do that. Mm-hmm. But if you are drafting for upside, I don't think he's a dependent player. I feel like he'd be best on a team like Philadelphia, who already has their primaries, and just say, go do this. I like DeAndre Hunter there, but I do think he actually has real NBA skill as far as shooting the basketball. I think he's going to be fine off the catch. So I like his translatability, but I'm not to the point where he's top 5. I think he's more of in a normal draft, he's more of mid-late teens for me, just because I know what he's going to be. But I don't think he has that kind of upside. You'll see some sites that have him 4 or 5. I can't get that high on him.
Yeah.
So who else do we have here? I got kind of sidetracked.
The rest of the guys are Grant Williams and Nassir Little.
Okay. First of all, Nassir Little, great kid. If you heard him interview at the Combine, this is the kind of shit that makes teams fuck up. It's because they hear him talk and they're like, yeah, this guy's awesome, right? He has physical tools. He has length. He's got this incredible work ethic. He has no feel for the game.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. I think he's going to shoot better in the pros, but what's the best player in the league that doesn't have feel? Is it Jaylen Brown?
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good player, but I don't know if that's a great player. I mean, it's fine if he goes to a system like the Spurs, but he's a development guy. You got to feel really good about your development. Grant Williams is kind of the opposite. He's got incredible feel. He speaks like he's the damn president of the United States. Like, it's incredible. He's like, his mom works at NASA. Like, he's incredibly intelligent for like a 20-year-old. He's really young for his class too, which is kind of interesting, but he's going to be someone who's undervalued in the class. He just played both days of the combine, underachieved because he didn't shoot that well. Mentioned that earlier, and he doesn't have high-level athleticism. His skill level's really underrated. Great passer, great decision maker, better shot maker than you think. So I have him in the lottery. I think he's a guy that just normally gets pushed down because it's like, okay, he doesn't have great positional size, doesn't have great length, not a crazy leaper, but he just does so many things that contribute to winning, and he's willing to do them.
Well, one thing, too, is like you want to draft with the star creator guy in most drafts. Like, that's kind of what you're looking for. But at the end of the day, look at the playoffs. Like, where are you ranking PJ Tucker in terms of every player in the playoffs and how far you want him? Like, he's fairly high. And like, you would never like draft him anywhere close to the lottery in a normal draft, but like, Houston, he's probably Houston's second best player, third best player in the playoffs. Like, Grant Williams can be PJ Tucker-ish and maybe even a little bit better on offense. So I totally get it.
Yeah, Grant's not going to be the guy that the Suns pick at number 6, I wouldn't have thought. But
no.
Going back to the first part of this series, I would mention that Grant is probably a candidate the Suns might look to go up from 32 for if they kind of turn over the roster a bit and bring in 2 new rookies that are playable, almost right away and that are going to give you some things on the court as NBA rookies versus the guys that you, I suppose, let go because they were damaging you. So I love Grant from that perspective. I'll throw to my 4 did you knows on these 4 guys quickly, Max. First with Grant Williams, did you know that his body fat is 5.4% and therefore you called a guy fat who is not fat?
Yes.
All I have to say about that is, first of all, if it were reversed, I would absolutely make fun of you for it constantly, so I don't blame you. But I will say that I did retract it like within 3 seconds and said he was not fat, but he was stocky. But go on.
Next one, Nassir Little. He measured in at 6'6" with a 7'1" and a quarter wingspan. Quick question at you, Cole. What position does he play in the NBA?
I think a team will start him at the 3, but he'll swing to the 4
Yep.
in some lineups. He won't play the 2. It's going to be 3-4.
Yep, and then Hunter, like episode 1 here, withdrew from the combine and rumours started swirling there, but we've already touched on that stuff in part 1, so we don't need to go with it again. And then I'll swing to Clarke, and then we can maybe have a broader conversation on him, Max. He measured in at 6'9" and a quarter with a 6'9" and a quarter wingspan. Shout out to my grade 6 teacher who taught me that wingspan is always the same as your height, particularly as a white Caucasian kid. So that Brandon Clarke's just showing that one still holds up. But further measurements for him, because we saw the wingspan stuff get spoken about quite a bit. Shout out to Elie on Twitter who pointed this out. He kind of got wrongly grouped with the small forwards, and therefore his vert of 40.5 was number 1 in the small forward group. His agility of 10.61 was also first. His shuttle of 3.54 was also first. His standing vert of 34 was also first, and his three-quarter sprint of 3.28 seconds was third in that grouping. So how about we move to a little more talk on Brandon Clarke, Max?
You set me up perfectly. All right, so David, are you familiar with what the Socratic method is? I know Cole is, but you know what the Socratic method is?
No, you're going to have to explain that one to both me and the listeners, I'm guessing, Max.
Oh, probably most listeners. So in law school, you're taught with the Socratic method, which is basically like a questioning way to elicit information. Mm-hmm. So that's why I ask questions, and I'm trying to get to a point, and I'm trying to help my audience and my answerers get to the same point.
Yep.
All right, so we'll start with Cole. Cole, why does a really long, big wingspan matter for NBA defense?
I mean, that's a convoluted question.
No, it is, but think about it in the most simplistic way. Like, why does a wingspan matter exactly? Like, what does it help you do exactly?
I mean, it helps you finish at the rim, extend. It helps you protect the rim. It helps you challenge shots.
Just on defense, yeah. So on defense only. Let's focus on defense. So it helps you get to what? Like, what does it help you do?
I'll get to the ball sooner.
Sure, get to places. So, David, What else helps you get to places?
Your IQ and your other athletic attributes such as vertical and agility, Max.
So, Cole, if you can get to the place without a wingspan with your athletic ability or your IQ, does it really matter if you don't have a wingspan?
It doesn't matter nearly as much. If you have anticipation, if you can get to places and you have his kind of vertical leaping, or I guess in general, we're talking in a general sense, if you have a 40-inch vertical, no.
All that truly matters here is getting to the spot before the other guy gets to the spot. That's what NBA defense is. That's literally all it is. So if Brandon Clarke wasn't as explosive or wasn't smart, I would care about his wingspan because then he wouldn't be able to get to the spot he needed to get to. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he is one of the better anticipators I've seen in a while in college, and he explodes out of the air, like, you know what? His 6'8" wingspan, I don't give a shit because he's going to get there anyway. That's kind of how I feel about Brandon Clarke.
Here's also the thing, too, is like at the combine, a lot of people are looking at wingspans without a prior. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we're projecting forward. Mm-hmm. Brandon Clarke already showed us he could do all this shit with a smaller wingspan. So, you know what I mean? He was a crazy block rate. He was incredible interior defense. He blocked some shots on the perimeter, mirroring guys. He challenges. He's so quick off the floor. He times jumps really well. He's going to have to do that at the NBA level in space, but he's really good. He's really good at all that. But what you use wingspan for is mostly for projection if you don't have a prior. We do have a prior with Clarke.
Yep, shout out to Ross Homan on Twitter who, when the measurements were coming out, said, give me, 1 year's worth of film over some measurements on the day of the combine. So I very much agree with that point, Cole. I don't know what else to really say about Clarke. We're pretty obsessed with him, Max, and definitely think that he's someone that the Suns should be looking at. They do appear to be interested, at least by having an interview with him at the combine. But I guess to double up on your point, if he measured out with a 7'1", 7'2" wingspan, as other guys at 6'9" are, we probably wouldn't be talking about him as being an option for the Suns at number 6, because if you look at his production in college last year with those measurements on top, he's maybe looking at being a top 3 or 4 pick. So he's probably in consensus even sliding back a little bit further, and partly because of these negative measurements, so to speak. But probably like Culver here, I'm pretty obsessed with Clarke just from a fit standpoint. So I'm interested to get both Cole and your thoughts on this. I've touched on this on Twitter a little bit, but I just love his fit with Ayton and with the team overall, and particularly with Mikal. I just think, I've talked about Mikal being a bit of a safety with Cole privately before, but you kind of have both of those guys as your safety, Cole. I'm referring to Mikal as the ground safety and Clarke as the air safety in that kind of lineup. But what's your thoughts on those two, and I guess the fit around the offensive stars in Booker and Ayton?
I love the defensive fit, for sure. I think that you can talk yourself into like a Denver Nuggets type of defensive scheme where you could play Clarke in like that Millsap role where he's really roaming and he's protecting the rim from the weak side, making good decisions, and he can cover a shit ton of ground. Like his reaction speed, his general speed is just ridiculous. Like he can cover an entire half of the floor. Mikal is fantastic at picking off passes with his length and anticipating. So you get Ayton at the point of attack more, shutting off that initial action. That's when he's best, is in space, not as a rim protector. So I think from a defensive vantage point, it's like an ideal fit. It's just the questions for me are more on the other end.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm glad you passed me there because I get it. I mean, we don't know he's going to shoot, right? We don't know for sure. It's far from certain. He reworked his entire jump shot, which David did a great job of showing on Twitter. I don't know if you saw his tweet, Cole. He had Brandon Clarke shooting from the exact same spot at San Jose State and in Gonzaga.
Yep.
Wow, that was something. That changed a lot. He went from a trebuchet to like a normal looking jump shot. So we'll see where that goes. That would help him a lot, obviously. But I think so. I saw Dean DeMarcus, who I actually liked his thread. I kind of just hating on this draft. But he compared in that thread, which I thought was wrong, he compared Brandon Clarke to Andre Robertson, which I think is just not right.
No.
Brandon Clarke has unreal finishing ability. Not only because of his athleticism, but also because, as David's pointed out, he calls him stretch. He's also just an incredible finisher from a lot of different angles. He contorts his body very well.
Yep.
So Brandon Clarke definitely has ability on offense to finish. I compare him sort of John Collins in that way. He's smaller, but is the same kind of like around the basket finisher in my opinion. I
loved his quote from the combine too, where he basically just said with full confidence, if he's in the paint, he's not going to miss.
Really, he really doesn't very often, does he? So I understand why. There's a reason why his BPM was second since they recorded it on Sports Reference behind Zion.
Yep.
Because he doesn't fucking miss. But anyway, so I think I'm higher on offense than most people are. I believe in the shot, believe in all that. But the other thing I wanted to add in for why I love this guy, and just so everyone can hate me on Twitter, because I said this didn't matter with Ayton. But Brandon Clarke, this is a quote from Dwayne Rankin's article about him today. "I've been a Suns fan forever. It would be cool to be able to go back home." That's from Brandon Clarke, who went to a high school that I am currently like 10 miles from.
What about you, Cole? What do you think about the offensive fit? I know you've probably got some thoughts there.
Yeah, I will say that I wrote an article earlier this year about his touch and how you can, if you're buying his shot, you're looking at his finishing ability, his runners. He is an incredible finisher on non-dunks, and he's like historically good.
Yep.
We never see guys that use all of these touch shots. And I talked about the shooting progression, like you noted, David, in your tweet, the mechanical progression. I watched a game of his at San Jose State. I got to halftime, or right before halftime, and I saw a shot, and I was like, fuck. You know what I mean? I loved him, and I was like, oh, I love this guy. Gonzaga's getting a great player. I saw a shot, and I was like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And then you see him overhaul his shot. And I'll say one thing about him outside of the touch. I agree with you guys. He's a pretty decent bet to shoot. You can't be sure. And why I like him with Towns again is because I know Towns is like a 40% three-point shooter. Mm-hmm. So I think Ayton's going to extend his range as well, but I can't say that for sure. So I just think he, again, in Minnesota, he gets him a little bit more safety. But I think this guy's going to improve. That's the thing, is he's already gotten better. Mm-hmm. Clarke, I don't care if he's 22. The guy works his ass off. He's working on his handle right now. He has that very, very predictable left dribble, and then he spins back to his right. Nobody could stop it.
Yep.
So he didn't have to give you a counter because he's just way more athletic than everybody else, especially in his league in the WCC. So I think he's going to improve. And we can't look at guys that are older and just say they're not going to get better. That's not the way this works. There are certain guys that just have that insatiable work ethic, and he loves basketball. He's a great kid. I think you have to factor all that into this analysis and just say he's the second most functional athlete in this class. Hands down to me. It's not even close.
Yep, I agree with everything that Cole has said there, Max. I'd probably just add, the things that I love about the offensive fit is I love the vertical spacing that he provides. We touched on that in our Clarke episode, so I won't go over that too much. And I actually think the way that he and Ayton can work together, both in the pick and roll with that spacing, hopefully if Ayton becomes a better shooter from outside and gives Clarke a little bit of space, there's almost a mini Zion. I don't want to get too hot takey here, but there's a mini Zion sort of comparison when you're thinking about, I guess, our last full episode, Max, where we talked about Zion still being a potential for the Suns before the lottery. Not quite to the extent of Zion, but there's a lot of similar things that you would have been able to do with him. And the touch is probably the biggest one there. We talked about Zion Ayton being just a formidable duo around the rim and in the paint with their touch. And Clarke's not too far behind from that standpoint.
No, yeah, it's like if Zion weren't an X-Man, then he would be Brandon Clarke.
Yep.
They're very similar in that way. They're just, Zion's the one generation guy. Okay, so I want to use this as a transition to the team building segment with Phoenix because we've been talking about this draft this whole time and how this draft is, maybe less than spectacular.
Yep.
I think the best way to illustrate that is to maybe throw out our composite big boards from the 2018 and 2019 combined.
Yep.
So last year's draft and this year's draft. And we won't consider 2018 players, based on what they played like in the NBA because it's kind of not fair. Just what we thought of them before the draft happened versus what we think of the 2019 players now. So, David, you want to start and then maybe Cole go and then I'll go?
Yeah, I'll throw my 10 out. It'll be pretty hard for people and you guys to keep up here, so maybe you can just note where your differences are going to be. But I would go Zion 1, Luka, Ayton, Bamba, which is regrettable, but if I go without last year, he has to stick at 4 for me. Trey would have been 5. Obviously, I'm high on Culver, so he would be 6 for me. Wendell Carter 7, RJ 8, Bagley 9, and it would be a real toss-up between SGA, who I was very high on, Max, and Ja Morant for that 10th spot.
Cole?
Yeah, I didn't iron out a specific list, so I'm just going to give you more of a general area here. So the guys, I have Luka and Zion in the same tier. I can't decide between them. I've never been able to. So I was really high on Luka. I said stupidly probably on this podcast that I think he's going to be the best player in the NBA in 5 years. I think, Max, you said
you still might.
You said Giannis, and I think Giannis is looking pretty good right now. So
have you seen the score of the game, Cole?
No, I have not.
Milwaukee's winning by 30 points, I think, or 25.
I had Milwaukee in 5 in this one. I'm not fucking around with them anymore. They're good.
Looks good.
I had Jaren and Trey as like the second tier guys. I would still have that. Wendell Carter, DeAndre Ayton, Marvin Bagley. I think I would even take Miles Bridges and Mikal Bridges over RJ. So really, I could probably get to 9 or 10 before the second player in this class, honestly. And that's only at the time of the draft. Like with the benefit of hindsight, I would take Shea Alexander over John Morant. I think just with the safety of the defense and the facilitation and stuff like that. But for me, this kind of just carves out what the value in this class is like I'm very, very heavily invested in 2018 over this class.
So I almost don't want to give mine because Cole makes my point better than I do, but I'm going to do it anyway. I have Zion, tier, Luka, tier, JJJ, tier, Trey, Ayton, Clarke, RJ, Bagley, Bamba, tier, Culver. So really the point here that I want to make is the 2018 draft is just so much better than the 2019 draft. It's really not close. And as we go into the Phoenix team building phase, I want to start with a note of optimism because if we are going to consider the 2018 play, I think it's arguable, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, Cole. I think it's arguable that the Suns have 3 players on their team right now who would go number 2 in the 2019 draft.
I think it's arguable. I think Ayton would unquestionably go 2. I would mess around and take Mikal too as well. Like I just believe so much in him as a role player, and that goes against credo of getting independent players who can create and then surrounding them with high level role players like Mikal. It's just really tough, man. I struggle with that more than anything, but yeah, I definitely aspire to that.
And then I imagine Booker's obvious for you.
Very obvious, yes.
Max, you made me realize 2 things. I somehow missed Jaren Jackson Jr. in my top 10, so he would probably slot somewhere around the 5 or 6 between Trey and Culver. And I'm definitely Team Luka over Zion if we get the benefit of hindsight. I'm not moving from that one just yet, but Zion might prove me wrong on that after a season. But that's probably all I need to add on that one.
All right, so that's kind of just how I wanted to characterize this because I think that the Suns are in a good spot here. We have 3 players who we think, all of us think, would be, highly regarded in this draft. So the question now is, how do we build around them? David, you want to kind of start this?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with a free agency rapid fire 7 seconds or less here because I think we need to kind of work out where the bigger free agents are going to go to frame what the Suns might be able to do this offseason and beyond. So if you're game for an impromptu 7 seconds or less, guys, I'll throw you some free agency questions here.
Let's do it.
So the first group are guys that I don't think are going to leave, and that is Clay, Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, Chris Middleton, and Al Horford. Do either of you have any objections to those guys not leaving their current teams?
Al Horford's the only one who knows what the hell happens, but the rest of them I agree, I guess.
Me as well. I think right now there's just too many moving parts with Boston, but I would bet on him maybe opting out and then signing a long-term deal for a little bit less money.
All right, second group here, guys that I think are leaving. Kevin Durant, I'd say the Knicks. Kyrie, I'm still going with the Knicks. Kawhi, I think, is Clippers bound. And Kemba, I'm going to throw out as maybe a Brooklyn candidate. Do either of you think that any of those guys might stay with their current teams or maybe go elsewhere?
I think Kyrie has a lot of options. I think Kyrie could go a lot of places because he's the moodiest man in the world. So who knows how he feels on July 1st?
And some Suns fans think Phoenix.
Listen, I don't think that's going to happen by any means. I think there's an under 5% chance, but if I wouldn't bet my life against it because he's that weird of a guy.
Yep. Cole, what about you?
I think Kemba, I think he might stay just because of the contract that he's going to get likely from the Hornets. I think they're going to be willing. They're going to have to pay him, and I'm not sure how much another contending team is really going to pay him right now. He just turned 29. That could be a bad contract in the 3rd and 4th years of it, and I just think that what do the Hornets have to lose at this point? They have so much albatross on their cap sheet as far as bad contracts, like Batum. I think they might just keep him, and they're going to pay him more than any other team would. Interesting.
All right, well, that leads us to our third one. And the last 2 big guys that I'm classing here are Boogie and D'Angelo Russell. Cole, I'll throw back to you. What are your predictions for those 2 as far as a team they might go to in the offseason?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question. How many teams really need point guards that can really sign D'Angelo? I think I think he stays. Honestly, I think that he developed in Brooklyn. I think he's kind of like the embodiment of what they're trying to sell younger prospects. Come here, play for Kenny Atkinson, improve.
Yep.
And he, reached all-star status. So I think they're at least going to sign him. Maybe they trade him later. And Boogie, I just have no effing idea, man. I have no idea. Like, that could go so many different ways.
Yeah.
He could go to Dallas, for example, and be like a low minutes guy. I think it's going to be a 1-year deal. I just have no idea where it's going to be.
Max?
Oh, you're going to get me to try to predict where Boogie's going to go. I agree with Cole. He's like impossible to predict. D'Angelo, that's an interesting one. I mean, it totally depends on how they do in free agency, obviously, right?
Yeah.
If some of these rumors are correct and they're going to get Kyrie or Jimmy Butler or whoever, maybe he goes. But, he could stay with Jimmy Butler too. If I had to, bet my life on it, I think I bet he stays like Cole does. But I would not feel confident about it.
Yep, and your answers have kind of perfectly set us up here for, a look at Phoenix Suns, in the short term, we've touched on it in these episodes already, kind of wanting the best roster they can get for the 1920 season and making some progress, but also having one eye on the future and how to, properly build around the combo of Booker, Ayton, and probably Mikal here. So my main concern, guys, is, the pressure of losing again and kind of starting again this season, and that may be rushing some poor decisions here. So kind of to run over a little recap, currently I project that we'll have about 10 million in space on July 1 to spend. If you get rid of the 6th pick and Oubre and Holmes, you can kind of get up to about 24.4 million. And then if you waive and stretch Johnson, you can get up to about 37.3. The reason I kind of mention those combination of things is you're not reliant on any other team to do those things to get up to around max level cap space. But I'm a little bit worried, as we all seem to agree, there's not going to be much movement with the bigger guys. I'm worried that the Suns might waste a little bit of time here at the start of free agency, chasing the bigger fish instead of just filling out some nice pieces. What's your thoughts on that, Max?
I think it's really, really interesting because I think the best targets the Suns have, beyond the guys who aren't actually going to come here, are restricted free agent point guards.
Yeah.
I think that Tyus Jones is super interesting. Tomas Satoransky is super interesting. DeLon Wright even is very interesting and maybe made even more so by the fact that Memphis may be less willing to bring him on because of what they've done in the lottery here.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you never want to have your hopes tied up in restricted free agency, that's like the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
But there is a kind of an overabundance of supply, which is nice. I didn't even mention Terry Rozier, which goddamn.
I'm going to edit that out.
Man, I think that they need to try to use their intel, use whatever they can to try to figure out which one of those guys is the most gettable, and then focus on them. Because my favorite guys, unfortunately, in this free agency class for them are those restricted free agent point guards.
Yeah, Cole, I'm going to throw a different question to you on the back of that. You've already, over these episodes, kind of given us a different perspective as not a Suns fan who is sick of the losing. So more longer term. You've touched on a little bit through the segments here, but what would kind of be your ultimate plan to build around that core of Booker, Ayton, and Mikal? What are some of the dangers here that we might fall into with the pressure of adding talent right away? And kind of if you were running the show and making those decisions, what would be the more longer-term decisions you'd look to make with this team?
I would definitely not look to endanger the long-term perspective. You have to keep in mind the ultimate goal long-term is to build around Booker, Ayton, Mikal, but you also have to find out if these guys are good enough, right?
Yeah.
And you have to marry that with short-term getting more adults and more basketball players in the building. I think that's key. So, like, if Ricky Rubio would come there I don't think he's like a great fit necessarily because of his shooting, but he's at least a guy who knows how to play basketball. He knows how to make high-level decisions, and he can be a holdover type. You know what I mean? Like, getting players like that who are just they're basketball players and surrounding the young guys with guys who can capably function in those settings. Like, you can't just have 5 rookies on the floor. That's just not tenable. Like, that's going to drive Devin Booker crazy. You have to get some guys in there that know how to play, and you have to do so, I think, without sacrificing long-term flexibility, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
But you have to really. My key thing is you really have to find out what you have with these guys. Like, I'm not like. the way I approach it, and this is not the way the franchise is going to approach it because teams always operate this way. When you take guys and they're pretty good, you just completely attach yourself to them. Like Ayton's going to get a max contract. I don't even care what he does the rest of his rookie contract. He already did. There's only been one guy who hasn't, and that's Anthony Bennett, and we know how that went. And obviously, you know what I mean? So like you have to find out what Ayton can do. You have to find out, can he improve as a rim protector? But you have to put him in position to succeed. And I think that's the key. You have to get those kinds of players in the building. I think last year, what was the intent? It was to get Trevor Ariza. He's supposed to be this veteran leader, and it didn't work out. Like I watched all those games at the beginning of the season, and when Cannon was starting at point guard and Ryan Anderson was starting, it's tough. It's tough to cultivate a winning environment if you don't have that kind of fuck you mentality on a nightly basis. You have to try, and you have to get that instilled in the players. So if this was a simple question, I would probably answer it in like 5 seconds, but it's not. You just have to you have to know these guys' character. I think that you have to get guys that are good locker room guys who also demand respect on the floor. That's why I think like maybe a Ricky Rubio, he fills a position of need, and he will have sway in the locker room. Maybe he makes Devin Booker more optimistic on the future. So it's tough.
You just successfully made me sad about Igor by mentioning Rubio a few times there, Cole. So congratulations on that one.
I have to real quick ask Cole this. Well, first of all, I have to correct Cole. He said Isaiah Cannon started at point guard. It was actually pointless guard.
I almost said it too.
I have to jump in and ask you about Ayton, obviously, because you watched a lot of Suns. Personally, I got higher on him throughout the season. I don't think he's like a future superstar for sure or anything like that at all, but I was happy to see him at least improve a little bit on defense, I thought, which I never saw really anything from him.
Yep.
Do you agree with that? Like, what were you on Ayton? Because you almost unfairly were categorized as an Ayton hater. I think you were an Ayton liker, just not liking as much as the rest of that 2018 draft. How do you feel about him throughout the season?
I think he definitely improved. I think the people that say he's the worst defensive player in the league, you didn't watch enough his progression and pick and roll. He did. I thought he dived off a little bit at the very end. Like the Utah game comes to mind. I didn't think he was very good in that game. And I think a lot of that's situational. So I think overall, you did see the requisite progressions, enough to make you at least somewhat comfortable that he might improve to a reasonable degree. I don't know if he's ever going to be an elite level rim protector. He allowed 64% at the rim this year, which is like, if you look at that historically for rookie bigs, it's on the very high end. And can he improve upon that? Does he improve upon reactions? He's a really interesting test case for me. But I think my overarching takeaway with him is, you guys have done a really good job of talking about this on the podcast, but I don't think he's a tone setter. Yeah. I don't think he changes. He's not Zion where he comes in and he's going to play hard every single possession and he's a star caliber player. You know what I mean? Like he's more of like, he adapts to his surroundings. Like that Milwaukee game when he was guarding Giannis and he was involved. Yeah. That was one of his best games. I thought his best game of the entire season was still the Nets game in December. I thought, if you want to watch Ayton and what he could be, watch that game. I want him to play more physical. Mm-hmm. I think he's more finesse than he is physical. He could be so dominant. He could be so much more punishing to smaller players. And we just don't see that consistently. I follow a lot of Suns guys, and there's one play that always stands out. I can't remember what his name is on Twitter, but he tweeted this, like, Ayton just legitimately pushed Middleton, and he was like, this is the highlight of the season for me. Like, that should tell you something, you know what I mean? So I'm not as down on him as some people are. It was always, I liked other prospects more than him. There's some reason for optimism, but more for me personally, I really want to see if he can turn these corners defensively. I really want to see if he can improve enough to be like a DeAndre Jordan kind of defender in his prime, who I thought his decision-making was always kind of overrated. But if you can get to that level, Ayton is just, his touch around the basket's incredible. Mm-hmm. There's just so many moving parts. And the last thing I'll say from this damn filibuster is that it just goes to kind of what you think about prospects. Do you view the upside as in you have steps 1, 2, and 3 to get to that? So Ayton has to dribble, he has to shoot, he has to play defense. You can view that as upside, like there's so much area for improvement. Or you can be more pessimistic and say he has to do probably 2 of these 3 things to really get to that level that a lot of people thought he was. So that just comes down to what your output is and what your outlook is on the draft. I'm a little bit more pessimistic, but I'm very, very curious to find out.
That's the best summary I've heard of Ayton. I agree with entirely all of it. And I don't mean to get sad here or pessimistic here, but man, that's kind of, not only did I want to win the lottery because I wanted Zion Williams on my team, but good God, could you imagine what Zion would have done for DeAndre Ayton?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And I think, Cole hit the nail on the head there with him not being a tone setter, and you and I have spoken about this a bit, Max, giving him those game-to-game tasks, whether it's Giannis or LeBron or, just making a challenge to him. I think Igor did an okay job in certain situations of challenging him before games, and that's where we got the best out of him. I think he even did it in that Brooklyn game off the top of my head, Cole, because it was directly after the 3 overtime Wizards game, and Igor kind of mentioned that they were going to need him. So I think he's responded well to those things, and that's how you tap into that mentally, at least for the first couple of seasons of his career. But I'll throw to a few more rapid-fire 7 seconds or less style questions here, guys, before we can probably wrap things up. I'll throw this one to both of you, but looking at those realistic outcomes that I talked about in terms of cap space and things, let's say they haven't addressed point guard after the draft or any draft night trades. Max, I'll go with you first. So they have around $10 million to spend. I'll give you a group of 4 guys here: Corey Joseph, Patrick Beverley, Tyus Jones, and DeLon Wright. If the contract for all of them is exactly the same, let's say 3 years, $30 million, who's your choice?
And I'm not factoring in the fact that restricted free agency sucks. I'm just getting them.
Correct.
Tyus Jones, probably. I think he has the most upside. In a small role, he's just shown a lot. I think he's really good. I think he'd be better if he had a team that kind of believed in him more, let him showcase. But Beverly is the other guy for me. If Beverly didn't scare me from like an age/injury perspective, it might be him. But for me, it's Tyus Jones.
Cole?
For me, it's Beverly. I just think you know what you're getting with him. And he's one of a culture guys where he's just going to play hard. Like, that's the Clippers, man. That's why they achieved so much this year, is because they just had guys that played hard every night. Montrezl Harrell, Patrick Beverly. Those guys just leave it out on the floor. And I think the ancillary effects, the rub-off on something like Ayton, on maybe Booker at times, is probably worth the cost and the risk of a longer-term contract to an older player.
Yeah, and I saw Justin Russo on Twitter, who's a very smart Clippers fan, kind of lay out their cap situation. I think he had them hopefully getting Beverly for around $8 million. So, the $10 million mark is probably what it might take, and maybe an extra year to get someone like Patrick Beverly over to the Suns. Max, I'm going to throw this question directly at you because you're a little bit more tied to Kelly Oubre, but say they've addressed the point guard situation this time, probably through a draft night trade, because I think even if they draft a point guard, they should still be signing another one. But we're looking at the power forward position now, so they have around that $10 million. The group of 4 here is Thad Young, JaMychal Green, Aminu, and Mirotic. But the caveat is, for Thad Young or Mirotic, you have to either sacrifice Oubre and get his extra $9 million, or sacrifice a future first to dump someone like TJ Warren to get a little bit of money to pay those 2 guys. Which out of the 4 would you go with for power forward?
Wow, that's really interesting. So I throw Thad Young out of this. It's Mirotic or the other guys, and it really comes down to, are you willing to sacrifice Oubre for Mirotic?
Yep.
I think I am. I mean, as much as I love Oubre, and God, I love the Valley Boys thing. I love the whole energy he brings. I love a lot about Oubre. He was literally my favorite thing about watching the Suns last year. If you're not going to get a guy like Zion next to Ayton, at least you're going to get like the perfect fit. And I really think Mirotic is. He is a fantastic shooter. He can actually do a little more things on offense. And then also, defensively, he's underrated. He's good on that end. Mm-hmm. I just think he's kind of exactly what you want next to Ayton. So for me, it's just, as much as I hate to say goodbye to Oubre, who's been a fantastic culture guy, Mirotic is just, he's the better fit.
Yep. And Cole, we've talked about needing leadership, which you touched on with Beverly there, but we also need shooting with this roster. So say they do let Oubre's cap hold go and that frees up around $9 million, as I said. I looked at some options. The group of 4 here is Jeremy Lamb, Wes Matthews, Danny Green, and Terrence Ross. If you had $9 million for one of those guys to add to the Suns, which one would you go with?
Danny Green. I just think he's the best player of that group.
Yeah, I agree.
And again, very good culture guy. He's been around great organizations. He knows how to win. I would bring him in because I think he's the best player, and B, I think the ancillary effects, I don't know about him personally as far as how he interacts with teammates, but there's a reason that most of the teams he's on are good.
Yeah, I agree with that. Max, I'm not sure if you want to jump in for a bonus answer there or not.
No, I actually I agree with you guys. I'd rather hear Cole's answer on the question that you asked me.
Okay, let's do that. Cole, do you need me to outline it again, or have you got an answer on that one?
Just the last two guys. I got Thad and Mirotic. What were the other two?
Jermichael Green and Aminu.
Oh, geez.
Which you can just have for the $10 million. You don't have to sacrifice a first or Oubre for either of those guys.
So I think I would do Aminu just because he puts them in better positions to succeed defensively. I think Aminu's biggest issues are in the playoffs when teams don't guard him, but short term, you're just trying to make the playoffs.
Yes.
So I don't think Mirotic's shooting is necessarily like a huge move piece, and I wouldn't move extra assets to sign Mirotic. So I think Aminu's my answer.
Yeah, and you touched on something there. I saw a Suns fan on Twitter. I can't remember who it was, and I wish we could have shouted out who it was from that Milwaukee comment that you made before. I can't remember who that is either, Cole, but maybe that'll come to us later. But yeah, I think, someone was saying Aminu's been shown up in the latter rounds of the playoffs, but the Suns are nowhere near the latter rounds of the playoffs, so I'm taking regular season Aminu to add to this team for sure, and not looking too much into that shooting weakness from late in the playoffs. But that's it, Max. We've kind of touched over the offseason from a realistic standpoint, and quite a few good answers there, I think, and Cole's... We know Cole watches the Suns a lot, so no surprise that he has a lot of good and similar thoughts in terms of what the Suns should be doing this offseason.
Yeah, no, this is really fun. I'm just going to hit with Cole with one last thing, and then we'll end this podcast. Cole, Melton or Okobo? That's been sort of a thing that's been fought over a little bit on Suns Twitter. Which one of those guys would you keep going forward?
Melton. I just believe in the kid. Like, I believe in the instincts. I posted that tweet where he signaled to Ayton a screen. He set a moving screen in transition to get Ayton a free run at the hoop. I just think that he's so smart. And I think in the right role, if he's a tertiary ball handler, you don't want him creating. He's not an on-ball guy really. He's a secondary, tertiary guy. But he shot pretty well on catch and shoots this year. And the defense is really what does it for me. He just plays bigger than his size, better than almost anyone I've seen that's 6'3". Mm-hmm. Okobo, I like. He's more of a six-man type to me. He's a scorer. I think I look if Melton had his pull-up game, this would be a very easy decision.
Yeah.
I like Okobo, but I think I would roll the dice on Melton just because I value his defense. I think if he makes the catch and shoot three, he can actually guard some guys in the playoffs.
He's the next Pat Bev, and I love that clip that Cole put up on Twitter, and I love the question from you, Max, because I think all the listeners that are tuning into that one should ask the question of themselves, because I am very doubtful that both of them will be on the roster to start next season.
It would actually be kind of shocking.
Yep.
All right, that's it. Cole, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We probably will turn this into 2 episodes. Cole, go ahead and promote anything you want. What do you got?
As usual at thestepien.com, big fan on Suns Reddit, obviously. So got a great following, but I'm sure that still go over well. So stepien.com, I do a podcast, Game Theory with Sam Vecini. I jump on that once a week, and I'm pretty active on Twitter during the draft. Do some podcasts, I'll do some radio hits. So if you want to learn more about prospects, follow me on Twitter at Cole Zwicker. And this has been fun, guys. Always appreciate coming on with you.
Cole, real quick, do you have anything to say to all the Suns fans who thought you were an idiot for saying Luka Doncic was the best player in last year's game?
I have a saying. It's any man who says I am the king is no true king. So I don't need to. I mean, it's obviously a Tywin quote. I don't need to really say things. I kind of let actions speak for themselves. I made a ton of mistakes in the past with prospects, and I thought last year went pretty well overall. So yeah, I mean, that's all I can really say about it.
Humble until the end. For us, please rate, review, and subscribe. We always appreciate it. David, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks again to Cole. This has been a lot of fun. This is definitely going to be a 2-parter, I imagine, and we'll take a little break after that, but plenty of draft stuff that we've covered now, Max, and people can go back and listen to our last few with several guests if they are tuning in for the first time or the first time in a while. So I'm looking forward to coming back with probably some mock draft and draft prediction stuff when it's right on our doorstep, Max.
Yeah, we have some real life stuff coming up, which is why we wanted to have an extra long one here with a great guest to split up into 2. But after that, we'll be back with, like you said, a mock draft. So look forward to that. Thanks, guys.